name's Eric Skidmore, and I'm a chaplain for the state police in South Carolina, and I run a program for the state police called the South Carolina Law Enforcement Assistance Program. It's a partnership between the Department of Natural Resources, the State Law Enforcement Division, the Department of Public Safety, and the Probation Agency. So the population I deal with is primarily public safety officers, state and local police officers.
Okay. And so, how often would you say you deal with people who have PTSD?
Well, I would say I deal with people almost every week who have the potential to develop PTSD. In any given week, our office may be called on by a state or local entity to deal with a situation where PTSD may develop. You know, PTSD is unique among the diagnoses in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health because it has to have a stressor. Some event has to have happened. Maybe that event is a intentional man-made event, maybe it's an unintentional man-made event, or maybe it's a natural event like a hurricane or a flood. But I would say every week in my work I have the potential to deal with that. I just, within 5 minutes of our conversation starting this afternoon, I was on the phone with the Highway Patrol where a police officer had to swim out in a pond to rescue someone who ultimately passed away. And that was with it's a stressor. What you have is a normal person and an abnormal event, and then the PTSD is the reaction to that event. The event is all out of the range of normal. Maybe you observe someone getting hurt or killed. Maybe you deal with some incident where there was an assault upon yourself and you have to respond and take someone's life. These are the kind of things that I get involved with law enforcement.
Okay. So would you consider disability?
Let me put it this way. I think there's a lot of information out there that pushes first responders and soldiers and other citizens who've experienced traumatic incidents in the direction of a disability. But I also know in my work with first responders that the use of traditional mental health practices, the use of counseling, the use of medicine, the use of both of those things together, I think that's the place where folks need to begin. Not to right off the bat have a kind of a Humpty Dumpty diagnosis and say all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I think there have been tremendous advances since PTSD was formally defined in 1980 after the Vietnam War. It was formally defined as a diagnostic criteria. And I'll just tell you, I've seen people come through our program, particularly the post-critical incident seminar, who were just, frankly, in a very difficult and dark spot. But through the use of EMDR, through the referral to professional mental health practitioners, through the continuous and dedicated work on their own personal wellness, I've seen police officers overcome what was a PTSD diagnosis. I can think of a sheriff right now who I'm absolutely sure had a PTSD diagnosis, but he worked diligently and hard to overcome that. Now, are there people who have a very severe form of PTSD and get diagnosed with a disability? Sure there are. I can list those people just like I can list the sheriff. So it's not a cookie-cutter approach, but I am pleased to say there's a lot of new information, new therapeutic techniques like EMDR that are providing great results to people with PTSD.
Who would you say people should turn to once they discover they have PTSD?
Well, I would say they need to seek out a practitioner who is well versed in not only PTSD but also in trauma and trauma reactions. Just like not all chaplains and preachers are created equal with the same gifts, and not all school teachers or principals are the same, not all mental health professionals have the same set of gifts and skills. If I had someone I loved that had been exposed to a serious stressor, like I described at the beginning of this video, and they were developing these symptoms that I've talked about, I would want to connect them with someone who had some skills in the treatment of PTSD.
Last question. Do you think that if treatment is put off, is detrimental to a person's health?
I do. I do think that that's true. I think that I just haven't seen PTSD get better on its own. It is in some ways, the old adage that time heals all wounds. I might say PTSD is an example of the failure of time to heal wounds. People watching this video may say, that makes sense. I can think of this older guy who was a World War II soldier, or a Korean War soldier, or a Vietnam era soldier, and they still have horrible, horrible dreams. They're still hypervigilant. They've developed a terrible addiction to prescription medicine or alcohol. I would say if a person's having the symptoms and reactions that we've talked about today, that they, for their own sake and the sake of the people that love them, that seeking out the wise counsel of a licensed mental health professional is the thing to do, sooner rather than later. And the other thing I'll say to that is, I've come to believe that it's not necessary to suffer the way that I see PTSD victims suffer. And they may suffer because of just what you said, that they don't seek out help. They don't believe it's important. They believe they can lick it on their own. I just see over and over again people suffering tremendously because they can't find a way out. They can't white knuckle their way through it. But through therapeutic conversations with a licensed mental health professional, treatment to deal with their sleep disturbance, with anxiety, with depression, with any addiction issues, the use of EMDR, the use of a peer support group, all of those things work together for good for the person who's suffering from PTSD.
Well, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Good luck with it.
Thank you.